Morning. Let me be the first to welcome you to this webinar today. We are very pleased at Farm Credit East to host this webinar on dairy outlook and dairy issues as we go into 2015. Before we get into the webinar, let me turn this over to Chris Lawton, who's just going to go through some technical aspects of the webinar and how you text in questions. Chris?
Hi, good morning. This is Chris Lawton. I'm Director of Knowledge Exchange here at Farm Credit East. Thank you for joining us today. Before we get started, a few technology tips to keep in mind while you're viewing today's webinar. One is that all attendees will be muted throughout the presentation. Every once in a while, be sure to tap your mouse so that your screen doesn't go to sleep during the presentation. There will be time for questions and answers at the end of each speaker. Questions can be text chatted in at any point during the presentations, and they will be asked of the speaker at the completion of their individual presentation. To send in your question, click on the red arrow to extend the GoToWebinar control panel. This arrow is typically found in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. You will then see a text box where you can type your question in and send it to us. Finally, a recording of today's presentation will be available on farmcrediteast.com/webinars for playback at a later time or for those who missed today's presentation. If you are having trouble accessing this recording, please contact Christy Schmidt at 1-800-562-2235.
With that, it's my pleasure to introduce our first presenter today, Andy Novakovic. Dr. Andrew Novakovic is an E.V. Baker Professor of Agricultural Economics in the Dyson School of Applied Economics at Cornell University. His primary research focus is on applied research in the field of dairy market economics and educational programs related to the dairy sector. He's written over 400 publications. He's spoken at dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, of meetings over the years. He has a number of research and extension awards from Cornell, but also from the American Agricultural Economics Association. Very appropriate to his presentation today is that he also has a part-time appointment with USDA as an advisor on dairy policy. He's a native of Wisconsin, bachelor's degree from the University of Wisconsin at River Falls, and did his graduate work at Purdue. Very pleased to welcome back to this dairy webinar, because he's done it in the past, Dr. Andy Novakovic. Andy?
Greetings, everyone. First, let me just double check to make sure everyone can see my screen all right. Is that true?
Nope, you need to
all right, very good. Very good.
Well, we're working on getting Andy back, but we are going to see Karl. Would you be able to make your presentation next, or at this point in time?
Yes, sure.
Okay, we will jump to your presentation. Christy, take it from here as far as getting Karl's up. I apologize to the audience on this.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Yes, Karl, you can see it.
All right. Well, let's go then. So, good morning, everybody, and happy to be here. Appreciate the opportunity to once again provide some information to dairy folks on relating to the environment and OSHA. Many of you remember the winter of 2014 was pretty tough. We had some really, really cold conditions, but also had a lot of rain and snow out too. And this rain plus what we call concrete frost put a number of our surface manure applications in a vulnerable position or situation. This led to a number of surface water incidents around the state, as well as well incidents, well contaminations that seem to have been involved manure. And both large and small farms were involved. So just for an example here, March 2014 was the 6th coldest on record. The early April was the ice out date for the Great Lakes. That's the 2nd latest on record. And yet with that cold March we had here in New York, we had 2 rainfall events of over 1 inch. And so again, when you combine that with the extremely frozen soil conditions that made for some
runoff situations that we hadn't seen in quite some time. Some of the lessons we learned from that, last year we had liquid and semi-solid manure was involved with some of these problems. And one of the key takeaways is that we've got to really take a hard look at our storage situations and make sure that we have adequate storage, especially on the regulated farms, but it's really something that everybody should take a look at for their operations. Clearly, spreading on what I'm calling concrete frost is risky. This is a term that I had not heard of before, but if you think back to what we saw in February and March around the state, it's certainly an accurate way to describe the soil conditions in many fields. We do have articles and extension information that is in the development phase to help producers and operators to get a better handle on these types of conditions. One of the key questions that we come away after the winter situation is how will the next CAFO permit address issues relating to winter applications? There are some folks who are calling for winter spreading bans or bans on spreading on frozen or snow-covered ground, and this is obviously something that we need to pay attention to. And in fact, the industry, through leadership from NEDPA and New York Farm Bureau, is pulled together a producer group to work with DEC and others on this topic. So one of our responses to this situation was we put together a CAFO roadshow in early November of 2014. This is, we haven't done a CAFO roadshow in a few years, and the goal here was to provide outreach regarding especially the winter concerns that we saw from last year. A lot of familiar farm organizations were involved in that, in sponsoring that event. And as I said, we needed to reach out to many producers. We had 4 locations across the state. Over 400 people attended that. The majority of those, many folks were from farms. And this strong producer response helps to send a great message back into Albany that the industry is aware of the concerns and we're taking this issue seriously. Another area that we talked about here at the CAFO Roadshow in November had to do with the 200 to 299 cow CAFO exemption, permit exemption that the governor brought to bear here a couple of years ago. There had been a legal challenge to that change, and it was recently dismissed. So that that change is no longer in jeopardy, if you will. Over time, some farms have been looking to terminate their permit, which is, of course, allowed. DEC is visiting these farms before accepting the termination. And it's an important to understand that you cannot terminate your permit in that 200 to 299 range if you have an ongoing discharge, if you have a discharge. So that has prevented some farms from terminating their permit as they would have liked to. Just want to make also a point, there are Dairy Acceleration Program funds available to help pay for a comprehensive nutrient management plan for farms in this size range and smaller, whether you're permitted or not. DEC is making these funds available to encourage farms to have a CNMP in place. And you can see the website there if you'd like further information for that. Another key piece of the CAFO Roadshow that we talked about had to do with medium CAFOs. You need to know or be reminded that medium CAFOs were supposed to be fully implemented by the end of June of 2014, and that with annual reports due coming up here at the end of March, DEC will be reviewing those for mediums and compliance. There'll be some follow-up, and over time, the mediums will receive, who are not fully implemented, will receive varying levels of attention from DEC to make sure that they get into compliance if they are not currently there. So if you may find yourself, or if you're not sure what your status is as a medium CAFO in this regard, I encourage people to talk to their planner.
Yes.
figure out how
Yes.
to move ahead here. Okay, another thing.
No, I haven't. You're
Got some feedback here from some other conversations going on. CAFO Roadshow also talked about, reminded folks that the next CAFO permits are being drafted. Both the Clean Water Act permit and the state-provided environmental conservation law permit are in the review and drafting stage. We've been sitting on an old Clean Water Act permit since 2004. That's going to be updated. Most large CAFOs in New York are in the old Clean Water Act permit and are going to need to make a decision here in the coming year about whether to move into a as yet unavailable new Clean Water Act permit or into the state-provided ECL permit. So again, conversations that need to be had with your planner. We do expect drafts of both of these permits out in this calendar year 2015, with a final late in the year or possibly early 2016. Okay, I'm going to switch really quickly over to OSHA. Want to remind folks that OSHA recently announced new injury reporting rules, and I also have a few words to say about the local emphasis program. I do want to remind folks that safety is important regardless of farm size. While OSHA cannot enforce on farms with fewer than 11 employees at any one time, it's still good for us to pay attention on farms of all sizes to health and safety issues. If you are a farm with 11 or more workers at any one time, OSHA announced new reporting requirements, and I want to key in any worker-related hospital admissions, any amputations, and any losses of an eye need to be reported to OSHA within 24 hours, and that's a new requirement. And you can see the website here for further information if you'd like to get that. Flow chart here, I'm going to skip that to keep this moving right along. Under the Dairy LEP, the New York Dairy Local Emphasis Program was renewed. This reminder, this local emphasis program allows random, unannounced, comprehensive site inspections, and I would be surprised if we don't see this for another year or two, renewed for another year or two in the dairy sector here in New York, just because that's how OSHA operates. We should be seeing a summary webinar available here in the near future. I know OSHA staff are working on a webinar that speaks to some of the things they learned from their initial inspection phase here in 2014. Speaking of 2014, there were 26 on-site consultation program inspections conducted by New York Department of Labor staff. These are voluntary. These are not enforcement related. These are a great way for a farm to, who's done some work on preparation for an OSHA inspection, to have an independent set of eyes come in and give them some tips and identify some issues to move forward. In addition, OSHA conducted 8 inspections under their local emphasis program. I know of at least one farm, the case has been closed and there were no violations issued, so that's a great thing. However, some other farms, according to OSHA, they saw pretty much all of the dairy dozen types of issues on, in one form or another on some of these farms. The most commonly observed hazards related to electrical, machine guarding, fall protection, and hazardous communications training. I should say to you that hazardous communications training should be pretty easy. You just need to call NICAM and schedule a training. They can do the training in English and Spanish, and that's one that if farms haven't done that or haven't renewed that and have employees who have not been trained, that's an easy one to get out of the way and be in compliance on. So we are going to see more local emphasis program inspections on dairies in New York in 2015. We don't have a specific number from OSHA. They're saying as their staff are available, they will be conducting these. If you're not ready, obviously time to get going. Call NICAM. There's their number and their website. I also want to say that farms that are not required to, where OSHA cannot enforce their regulations, they can get help too, and a great place to start is to ask for a farm safety walk from NICAM. With that, there's my whirlwind tour of OSHA and environmental, and if we have a moment or two for questions, I'll take them.
Karl, thank you very much. Appreciate it very much. I do apologize. I did not introduce Karl when we transitioned, when we lost Andy Novakovic, but Karl's a senior extension associate in field crops and nutrient management with Cornell's Pro Dairy program. His role is to develop and deliver educational programs promoting agriculturally and environmentally sound nutrient practices and management on farms. He holds a BS degree from Cornell University and a law degree from the University of Buffalo. That's one part of our program that kind of focuses primarily on New York. Question, Karl, are you aware of OSHA inspections also in other states in the Northeast outside of New York?
So OSHA, I'm not aware of any local emphasis programs for other states in the Northeast relating to dairy outside of New York. So that means they will not do random unannounced inspections. However, for farms with 11 or more employees that have a serious injury or, God forbid, a death, that could trigger an OSHA visit. So they're not going to come knocking randomly, but if they see something in the paper or get a report from local responders, they could visit other farms. So a good reason for farms outside of New York to be looking at their health and safety programs in addition.
Thank you. Another question came in, Karl. What's happening with the proposal to redefine waterways of the United States? I believe that's probably reference to the WOTUS proposal. Are you up to date on that one?
So that one, if I recall correctly, EPA is backing off from that a little bit. I'm not sure that there's any teeth in any of this right now, and we're waiting to hear more from Washington, D.C. I guess that's what I would say about it at this point.
And I would just add that that was, of course, a regulatory proposal. It got a lot of comments. I think the proposal comment period closed in November, and as Karl says, we just have not heard any final decisions from EPA whether they will go forward or how they will go forward in that regard. Another question, Wisconsin recently announced that it considers manure a hazardous waste. How or do you think this will impact the Northeast?
I don't see that coming here very quickly. Of course, manure is getting more and more attention, and we do need to be we need to up our game across the board in terms of keeping it on the land and out of waterways. And if we do that, I think we can avoid these kinds of discussions where we have legal declarations about hazardous waste and that sort of thing. So I'm not hearing anybody in New York talking about it that way, and I hope we can keep it that way.
Okay. Well, I think that does the questions for now for Karl. Karl, that was a great overview of where we're at with CAFO, where we're at with OSHA, as well as kind of a general environmental perspective, if you will. I think you're going to stay on, and there may be a question for you later, but at this point in time, we're going to switch over to the economic outlook situation with Mark Stephenson. Dr. Mark Stephenson is Director of Dairy Policy Analysis at the University of Wisconsin. In this position, Mark conducts and coordinates research and outreach activities related to the dairy industry. He is involved in applied research at the firm level, including milk assembly cost, processing costs and efficiencies, new processing technologies, and new dairy ingredients. It's also active in sector-level performance, including dairy policy and price forecasting. Prior to his present position, Mark was Associate Director for Educational Outlook with the Cornell program on dairy market and policy. It's a great pleasure for us to welcome back Dr. Mark Stephenson to this Dairy Outlook webinar. Mark?
Thank you. Appreciate that a lot. Let me just see if I can get things set up here properly and get my go-to-meeting out of the way. Are you seeing my screen okay?
Yes, we are.
Okay, good. Well, I wanted to give a little bit of overview, I guess, of not just where we're going, but also where we've been, because that momentum of where we've been, I think, is giving us the slingshot effect into 2013. And this is through my lens, my view. I'm looking at the dairy industry maybe a little bit differently, or I have been at least for several months than the rest of was being reflected on futures markets, although they're catching up with me rapidly. I think we're all expecting 2015 to be a very different year than what we had seen last year in 2014. But let's take a review. I think that we've had some highlights from 2014 that are going to be pretty important. All-time high milk prices. Wow, what an incredible year. In fact, we had about 5 months of the year when the all-milk price was more than $25 a hundredweight. So it was a terrific year for milk prices. And we've had much lower feed prices.
So you lost me very...
Okay. Do you have audio yet?
I can't hear anything.
Yes, we have you fine, Mark.
Okay. I'm getting mixed feed, I guess.
Sorry about the interference.
Sure. We're having much lower feed prices than we had back in 2012 and 13. Prices had retreated in 2014, and I expect that to carry on through for 2015. And these high milk prices last year and lower feed prices gave us high and persistent income over feed cost margins for all of 2014. Really a terrific year. It also meant, though, that the consumer was facing high prices for dairy products at retail. But the good news for us was that consumer buoyancy was such that they just didn't run away from consumption. So, you know, taken in highlights, I think it's been a pretty good year. We can attribute much of what happened last year to the wave of exports that we've had. This graph that I'm showing you is giving you a sense of what the percentage of milk solids that we've produced in this country is that have been exported. And you'll see that this is a pretty steady trend upward. There was a dip in 2009 when we had the global recession and really low milk prices, but we carried that to more than 16% of our milk production this year that was exported to other countries. And those exports were strong, and they gave us really strong milk prices. Butter, in particular, was the big export product for us in the last quarter of 2013 and the first quarter, almost the first half of 2014. So butter was something that really pulled our prices along this year. Exports have been very important part of the story of where we were in 2014 and what's going to happen in 2015. It gave us this all milk price that's been volatile but high. And I mean, really, if you look at the prices that we had in 2014, all of those months that were up there well over $24, $25 a hundredweight, it's been a terrific year for milk prices. And as I mentioned, feed prices have retrenched, particularly corn. And as corn prices have moved downward, we've found that prices of other products, not to the same extent, but following those prices down, soybean meal and hay prices to a lesser extent have also decreased. So there have been feed prices that are not nearly as bad as they were a couple of years ago, but certainly higher than they had been historically. The margin protection program, among other things, has given us some vocabulary for just talking about how good things have been, realizing that milk prices and feed prices are the most volatile of our prices that we are facing. And this MPP margin calculation for 2014 was the highest we ever had. 2007 was a great year for the dairy industry, but we've eclipsed even that margin in 2014. So in some ways, I think that 2014 might be perhaps a year for the generation of producers we have as just an outstanding year. And, you know, these strong margins, strong profit is being given to dairy farms as a signal from the marketplace that says we want more of your product. And whether we recognize that or not, we have an incentive, those strong profit margins, to produce more milk. And so farms began to retain cows. That was one of the first things that we saw. The red line in here is showing you the cow slaughter for 2014 relative to the previous 2 years. And by the time we have gotten to the November numbers, we actually had more than 250,000 cows that didn't go to slaughter that did in the previous years. So quite a few cows were retained. Some of those obviously more marginal animals, but it did lead to higher cow numbers. And I've got a graph here that's showing you the number of dairy cows in the U.S. herd. It's kind of busy, but I put it on there with that many years to provide some context for what we were looking at. That heavy red line is 2014, showing you the increase in cow numbers because we didn't slaughter as many animals. And I ask you not so much to look at the level of that, but rather to look at the pattern, the rate of growth, if you will, in cow numbers. One of the first lines that pops out, I think, as being quite parallel to that is the blue line at the very top, which was 2008. Those really strong profits and margins of 2007 and 8 gave rise to more cow numbers. And of course, that was followed later by that purple line that is going from the upper left corner of that graph to the bottom right corner, with cows being heavily culled. 2009, not a good year. And the question that might come up to folks is 2014 going to be a year that presages something like 2009 again? I will just let you know that personally I don't think that's going to be the case, but we are going to have to slow down milk production. We've also had increases in milk per cow. You can see on this chart that that increase has been stronger here in the last 3 quarters of the year than it was in the first quarter. Again, a response to these strong profit margins as farms pushed cows harder. Now, I think that's difficult to do. If you're retaining animals and building the herd that way, you're usually retaining animals that are more marginal and not likely to produce as much milk as the animals that you would have kept in the herd regardless of where the prices were. So to get this strong a milk production per cow response while you're retaining as many animals as you did just shows how strong that profit margin really was and the signals that it sent to the farm. And taken together, of course, we had a pretty strong production response. I'll tell you that in my years of watching this kind of thing that this was not as fast nor as strong as I expected. You can see on the graph here the change in milk percentage of milk production from year earlier levels in the U.S. And the first third of the year showed about a 1% increase. It surprised me that we didn't have an increase more rapid than that. Farms were a little bit restrained, but finally, you know, we've had just a strong enough signal that somewhere between 3 and 4% increases in milk production have been occurring in the U.S. and indeed almost all parts of the milk-producing country. So we've had fairly strong production response. I want to shift gears just a little bit to consumption of dairy products. We've had a very slow but steady recovery from the recession in 2009. This is showing you the unemployment rate. And that unemployment rate topped at about 10%, but the Fed has given us all kinds of signals now that we are below 6% level that they may change what they're doing. In fact, quantitative easing has stopped or in the process of stopping. They aren't going to be pumping as much money into the economy as a result of that. And I think we can watch and see when inflation doesn't grow that interest rates may indeed rise a little bit in the next year or two. So We're watching to see where this takes us. But the point is that consumers were feeling better about the economy as this unemployment rate has dropped. You can see that in this number that we call consumer confidence in the economy. This is composed of two different pieces. One of those is the present situation, and the other are expectations of consumers. So they ask them sets of questions like, how are you feeling today about the economy, and how do you think you're going to be feeling about the economy in the near future, 6 to 8 months out? And those expectations tend to lead us in different directions. You can see back in 2006 and 2007 that the blue line showing you present situation, consumer confidence is really high. They said, feels great right now. But the green line is saying that consumers were nervous about the future. And sure enough, their confidence fell dramatically into the recession of 2009. Coming out of that recession, expectations were higher and than present circumstance, and that has pulled consumer confidence up. I think in some ways it's a parallel story to what we've seen with employment. But I worry a little bit that all of this is coming together here over 2014, and I don't want to read too much into it, I guess, but the expectations are actually below present situation. And you wonder, is this just a small thing, or is this the start of consumers becoming worried once again about the future of our economy, and will that drag us backward? At wholesale level, we've had the National Ag Statistics Service and now the Agricultural Marketing Service weekly survey of product prices. This is used to set the prices in federal milk marketing orders for class 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 milk. These are wholesale prices for cheddar cheese in the orange line, in the brownish line, prices for butter, blue line, non-fat dry milk, and the green line for whey. And you'll notice here in this graph over some period of time that in particular butter prices have gone to all-time highs, I mean way above earlier high levels. Cheese prices also all-time highs, but just a little bit higher than some of their peaks in the past. Non-fat dry milk hit the same level that we've had in the past as an all-time high price. So at wholesale level, the prices were pretty high. That also got translated to consumers, and this is the Bureau of Labor Statistics index of dairy and related dairy products. And this is just a way of trying to combine fluid milk and butter and cheese and ice cream and yogurt and just say at the retail level, what were product prices looking like? And you can see that in 2014, they too were at all-time highs. Now, they didn't maybe look as high as the retail prices were, or the wholesale prices were, nor as farm prices were, and that's because the marketing chain has a tendency to absorb some of those movements, both on the up and the down side. But nevertheless, consumers faced those higher prices, and they didn't run away from consumption. The stocks of dairy products were tight, particularly for products like butter and to a lesser extent cheese. Here you can see the stock patterns that we usually are building our dairy stocks up in the spring flush of the year. The red line hit its peak in about May this past year, 2014, but that was nowhere near as high as they were in the green line of 2013 before that. We sold a lot of butter overseas early on, and so we just didn't have the product in inventory, and our spring flush was not big enough to build those. So that gave us relatively tight stocks, and it allowed butter prices to do something different than what was happening in the rest of the world. Our dairy economy is now very tightly tied to world market prices, but there are times when we can fly free and on our own. That was certainly the case with butter. You'll notice this chart here is showing you both Oceania and Europe prices. Those are in green and blue bands respectively for butter. And the red line showing you those same NASS prices that we were just looking at for butter. And the butter prices overseas was declining from the first of the year right down to the present day. And during most of that time period, our U.S. prices for butter were increasing, going in exactly the opposite direction. Normally, our product prices are selling at a discount to those world prices. We're usually, in other words, somewhere near the bottom or even below that green band And that's where we seem to be competitive in world markets at different prices. So when we were reaching almost $2.90 a pound for butter, we were clearly non-competitive and weren't selling product overseas. And that had to change, and in fact has been dropping like a brick here over the last 3 months. So butter prices are coming back down. Same thing was true to a lesser extent with cheese and with non-fat dry milk and with whey prices. But there are some implications. I think that the world prices for butter may have found their bottom. They seem to be plateauing or even turning up a little bit in the last global dairy trade. But the U.S. price to be competitive with where they are right now probably needs to be somewhere around $1.10 to $1.20 a pound. So this is a much lower price than we experienced at $2.90 a pound. Cheese may not be at the bottom yet, although we've had some real declines here in the last day or so. The U.S. price would need to be around $1.40 to $1.50 a pound to be competitive at current world prices. And non-fat or skim milk prices are still drifting downward in world markets. I'm not sure they've found their bottom yet, but the U.S. price would need to be about 90 cents a pound to $1 a pound to be competitive. Whey would need to be 50 to 55 cents a pound. So you can put those things together and recognize that the world is giving us some lower prices for products. It's also true that the U.S. dollar has been strengthening relative to other major currencies, and as the dollar value comes up, it makes our products look more expensive to other countries who might be purchasing them. So a strong dollar is not a friend of U.S. exports. And that's making those prices that we've talked about maybe just a little bit harder to sell against, given the strong dollar that we've had. You might ask the question, why does our dollar look so strong, or has it been strengthening? Well, the rest of the world has been having lots of problems, and sometimes dollars fly to the U.S. because it appears to be a safe haven. Our economy is strong, relatively strong, and has been growing and strengthening, so world dollars are coming here, and our dollar is strengthening. There's some implications to this. If I put those product prices that I talked about where we would need to be competitive today into our federal product price formulas, that would yield Class 3 prices at the low end of $12 up to a high end of $15 a hundredweight. Class 4 prices would be somewhere between $11 to $14 a hundredweight. Those are half of the prices that we've had at the peak of 2014. So a tremendous decline from where we had been. The futures markets are currently forecasting Class 3 and 4 or in the low $15 and $14 range respectively. The prices are getting down there to where I think they have to be for us to be competitive, but they aren't quite there yet. So I do think that we'll get there, but we're still probably have a little ways to go. Futures markets are in fact catching up with reality now, but it took them some time to do it. Let's take a quick look around the world to change milk production. These are the major exporting countries of the world. U.S. Currently, for the first 10 months of 2014, was up about 2% milk production. New Zealand up a stunning 12%. That actually is because the year earlier months that we were measuring 2014 from, in other words, the first 10 months of 2013, were bad months for New Zealand. They had a 30-year drought going on then. So this is not necessarily off-the-charts production increase. It's just a big change from their year earlier levels. Australia, a little over 4%, and the European Union about 5% increases. So big milk production increases for everybody. We can maybe hope for some intervention based on weather patterns. Right now, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Association says there's a 65 to 70% chance that we'll get El Niño conditions this winter and spring in the northern hemisphere. What that means is that this gives us a greater chance of rain and cooler weather in the western U.S., and it also means that there's a greater chance of hot and dry conditions in Oceania, which is not good for milk production in that part of the world. We have seen some rain more recently in California and Texas. The drought is a long way from being broken there, but there has been relief. And there has been some shortfall in moisture in New Zealand too, so perhaps the El Niño conditions are beginning to build. We do have an option, though, in this country right now to producing milk. A lot of those cows that were retained and kept in the herd are animals that are marginal. They're maybe three-titted animals or animals that you otherwise might want to cull. And the good news is that cull cow price has never been higher than it is today. Look at this. I mean, we're talking of something that's nearly double where we were just a few years ago. I've heard anecdotal evidence of farms coming back from taking an animal to slaughter that said, man, I got $2,000 for that big-bodied cow. So animals that are not milking well might do well to be going to slaughter right now. And over the course of this next year, I think cull cow price will still hold up pretty well because beef animals are still in short supply. The European Union has a couple of issues that have been going on. One of them is that their quota on milk production comes off in April of this coming year, 2015. There are several countries that have said we intend to expand production. Ireland is one example where they've said we intend to increase production by as much as 50% over the next several years. But in truth, most of the 28 countries of the European Union are not at their quota limits now. So we will see some increased production, I have no doubt, but it's not going to be an overwhelming rush of milk to the market. EU processors have started to invest, though, in processing capacity, and they seem to be focused on milk powders. Very few of those are in cheese plants or butter. We've also had Russia that banned imports, and their import ban on the countries of the EU mean that the European Union is looking for a home for some of their dairy product. And it's disrupted world markets. And of course, Russia is a big buyer of dairy product, and as their ruble value has fallen, they simply aren't buying as much dairy product, put more product on the market, and been one of the things that's kept our prices low. China also tapped on the brakes. They're a huge buyer. 20% of world dairy trade is represented by China purchases alone. Last year they bought early and then they slowed well down, but we expect them to be back in the game a little bit later in the year. You can see on this graph that the green bars in the last quarter of 2013 shows a big increase in powder imports in China, and that was followed by this blue line here in the first half of 2014 as well. Big purchases of powder. So they had plenty of product on their shore, landed already, and they simply quit buying after that. Their purchases have been very small. They're now waiting, I think, until they have a real need for more product and let those market prices in the world fall. So that's what's going on there right now. We've had the new Margin Protect program introduced, and as I mentioned, I think it gives us another way to talk about just profitability on farms. Let's think about the difference between those milk prices and a feed or ration value. And when we started to talk about this program back in September, we were talking about margins that got down to the 1050 level. Now, looking at futures markets values and projecting the margins forward, you can see that we're expecting this dip into an area where we would have payments at higher levels of protection. In fact, that margin gets down into the $7 range there for a few months, but then it's expected to come back up. Long term, this margin protection program margin value has averaged about $8.50. So this return in the second half of the year, as forecast by futures markets, looks like a return to kind of a normal price range for us, or profit range. However, I'm going to be a little grumpier than that and tell you that I think the markets are not going to clear that quickly, and futures markets will watch that second half kind of sag into lower levels, perhaps some payments there as well. So here's my forecast. I expect significant decline in milk prices. Class 3 will drop by at least $7 on average. Class 4 by at least $8. For the Northeast, that means an all-milk price drop of about $7.60. So if you're budgeting on your own operation, look at your average prices last year on your farm and you can take maybe $7.50 to $7.75 off of that. Harvest and feed prices are known. They'll vary mostly with storage cost. So I think that MPP margin may be a little worse than these markets are currently forecasting. Not a horrible year, but much worse than 2014. So when you're looking at dairy, I look through my lens. You know, I don't want you to think that I'm just being mean and torturing small insects with my magnifying glass here. But I do think that we have a much worse outlook for milk prices than we had last year. And with that, if I have any time left, I'd be happy to take some questions.
Thank you, Mark. Excellent overview. Somewhat difficult news to hear there at the end of the presentation. Let me encourage folks to go ahead and text your questions in. Mark, first question. The U.S. dollar has been strengthening against other currencies. What is the likely impact on the ability of the U.S. dairy industry to export dairy products?
Well, clearly it doesn't help. And it makes our dairy products look like they're relatively more expensive than other countries as a source. So, you know, when I showed you that comparison of butter prices with those world prices, most of the months we were at a discount comparison to Oceania or the EU. And it may be the case that we need to be at a little bit more of a discount than we otherwise have been in the past to be competitive. So, you know, what does that mean? Another nickel, maybe 10 cents at the most per hundredweight, but it is going to be harder to sell product into world markets with a strong dollar.
Okay. And again, I'd encourage folks to text chat questions in. Next question, Mark. There had been talk about the dairy cycle being a 3-year cycle. What's your perspective on that? Is that still the situation? One good year followed by a relatively poor year and then somewhat of an average year? Is that where we're still at, you think, or is that changing?
Well, you know, we don't fully understand everything that I think impacts these cycles, but much of what they are is a producer responding to strong price signals. It takes a while to retain those cows, get that extra calf, raise it up, bring that in herd. And so that's part of what we think gives rise to the cycles that we have. And, you know, this year is almost on par with where we would expect that cycle to be if in fact we saw our last trough happening, in, say, early 2012. It's just about time now that we would expect to be seeing going into 2015 the next trough. So not entirely unexpected. And personally, I think we're going to be not really digging our way out of this to any great extent until we start to get into 2016. Maybe in that first half we'll see that turn around and prices begin to recover.
Thank you. We have, I think, 3 more questions. Again, I would encourage folks to go ahead and text your questions in. Is the next question, Mark, is the yogurt boom slowing down or over?
You know, I'm not sure that I have a good answer for that. If you look at yogurt consumption, particularly total yogurt consumption, it continues to increase. I mean, we don't see that has changed in any measurable kind of way. So I think that maybe it's out of the headlines now, and particularly for the Northeast, as you see a lot of that production having moved to the West, you know, you may feel at home like, gosh, what happened to that? You know, is that over? With any new product, anything that becomes a phenomenon, there is a boom part of the cycle, and then we plateau, and then perhaps, you know, we can wane a bit over time. I don't think we're at the peak of that yet. But for the Northeast, I think you're not going to see the kind of growth that you got when you had new plants and a lot of expansion occurring.
Thank you on that one. Next question. What year of the past do you think 2015 will look like? I guess they're probably thinking, is this another 2012? Is this another 2009? So what year in the past do you think we're really looking at in 2015?
That's a good question, and maybe kind of a hard one. I'm thinking that maybe our margins are going to feel maybe a lot more like they did in, say, 2013. In other words, it wasn't an outstanding year, but it wasn't a horrible year either. So again, it sounds like I just delivered a really depressing, downbeat kind of message, but you know, I would remind us that we're comparing ourselves against the best year that we've ever had. So, you know, I'm talking about kind of a return to something that's a little below average, but nothing like a 2009.
Okay. The next question, we have, I guess, two more questions, Mark. You mentioned an increase in overall herd size. Do you have a feel on the overall replacement herd size?
Not quite sure what that question means. We've certainly seen that the replacement numbers have been tight, or at least not as big as they were for some years. So the percentage of replacement animals relative to milking cows is a little down from where it was in the peak a few years ago. I don't know if that's a reflection of just changing in strategies of how we're raising calves or having some better idea of what those calves are going to perform like, so we're culling calves early rather than raising them or not. But we obviously have adequate replacements. I mean, we're still adding cows when we have the signals that allow us to add cows.
Very good. We'll do one more question, and then we're going to go back to Andy Novakovic and get his presentation. And I hope, Mark, you can maybe hang on with us for that. The next question will be: margin protection program result in a slowdown in the adjustment in milk production? In other words, will producers be assisted by that program and as such not adjust downward production?
Well, I think that, you know, that is certainly going to be the direction that you'd expect a program like this to do. I mean, to the extent that farms have that pain, that hurt muted as a result of a program like this, they don't have as big an incentive to reduce milk production and, you know, make the market corrections as quickly as they did before. But that said, look, we've had about half the farms in the country that signed up for MPP. We don't actually know how much milk that is yet. I think Andy's maybe going to give us more information about that. But right now, I think dairy producers are approaching this tepidly, and I don't think we're going to find that a lot of them have bought up at the $8 level that would assure them payments in the next several months. So, you know, I think MPP will have an impact in the long term, but not a big impact this year.
Well, Mark, that was a great presentation, great responses, very insightful, I think very helpful to the participants on the call today. If you could stay with us, that would be great. We may come back with other questions toward the end. But at this point, I would like to reintroduce Andy Novakovic. Andy, of course, is with Cornell University. He's certainly an expert on dairy policy and dairy economic markets. With that, Andy, take it to discuss dairy policy issues in the milk margin protection program.
Okay, thanks, Bob. I'll give it another try. I'm sorry I got lost last time, but perhaps the good news is I had 15, 20 minutes to practice before I'm doing it now. Anyway, let me spend a few moments with you talking about what just happened in the sense of the sign-up for the Margin Protection Program, and what comes next in the sense of what other policy issues are going to be on the agenda for the coming year, including whether or not we might want to somehow revisit MPP Dairy with some sort of tweaks or whatever. All of you, I assume, have heard Secretary Vilsack's press comments in which he indicated that over half of U.S. farms enrolled. that is the beginning and end of sort of the hard data on enrollment. And in point of fact, he didn't actually even give us a number, a precise number of enrollments. So what I'm going to share with you is a little bit of me extrapolating from conversations and anecdotes, a little bit of me trying to fill in the gaps with sort of my own intuition. I think it will actually be quite a while, perhaps several months, before we get more detailed information about the actual enrollment. I hope it'll be sooner, but I'm not going to guess that. So you'll have to take what I'm going to say to you with a little bit of a grain of salt, because the official numbers are simply not available at this point. We do know that a little over half of all U.S. farms enrolled. I think when we see more data, we'll find out that the variation in enrollment across regions of the country, but also within regions of the country, within states, varies considerably. Within the state of New York, for example, I think we're going to see that the sign-up in western New York as a percentage of eligible farms is quite a bit different than it was in southeastern New York. In the Midwest, I think we'll see that the sign-up in Minnesota was quite a bit different than Wisconsin. And some of these, the reason for some of these differences might seem fairly obvious. Larger scale farms didn't use the program as heavily as some other farms. Maybe it's related to the extent to which a local county FSA office promoted the program, or a local county extension office provided helpful materials to farmers. Maybe how much a cooperative might have encouraged their members, or how much an elected official might have been involved in encouraging sign-up. There could be a variety of reasons. And, you know, as an educator, I think those are going to be important for us. I think as a legislator, those folks will also kind of want to understand that there's some things that we could do better in delivering the program or in designing the program that would encourage people who could take advantage of it to do so more. I think the simple fact that we're heading into what's going to be an ugly few months is also going to have clear implications for the 2016 sign-up. At this point, I'll let you guys all guess with me whether that implication is that more people will be discouraged, oh, this program doesn't work, or more people are going to be encouraged and say, gosh, I guess I should have signed up, or signed up at a higher level. As Mark intimated, we have really no information at all about what coverage levels were chosen by those people who enrolled. We do have a little insight that suggests that probably somewhat over half of the people who elected coverage chose a coverage level higher than the minimum $4. We certainly have anecdotes from the field that say people who had signed up for the catastrophic coverage level earlier in the sign-up period came back in before it was over and amended it to a higher level. I have some anecdotal information that suggests that the 650 level plus or minus was pretty popular. That seems logical. A lot of folks have described that as kind of a sweet spot. But I've also heard some folks in New York, at least, say, gosh, we had more signups at the $8 level than I expected. Well, it kind of begs the question, what did you expect? Did you expect 1% and it got 3? It's still pretty low. Or did you expect 10% and it got 30? And that would be pretty high. All of these, I think, are important because it gets, in many ways, to the question that was asked of Mark. Will MPP Dairy have a tendency to reduce what we might otherwise expect to be the supply response to low prices? Well, that obviously begs the question, did you even get a benefit under MPP Dairy? If you signed up for catastrophic coverage, there's a very low probability that you're going to get any kind of benefit payment. If you signed up for 650 or 7, you've got a 1 out of 3, 1 out of 2 chance of getting the payment. and maybe that will have some effect. If you signed up at $8, at least early in 2015, the chance of getting a benefit payment rises to 75% or 80%. So it's not just as simple as did you sign up, I got a payment. It really begs the question, what did you sign up for? Also, we have no information whatsoever on the percentage of milk that's covered. A little over half of the farms enrolled. The maximum coverage you could get is 90%. I think it's probably simple arithmetic that less than half of the U.S. milk supply is covered. It may be not too much less than half. Obviously, everybody that signed up for CAT coverage was in at 90%. And from what I can discern from my conversations with folks in the field, a lot of people who elected buy-up coverage, the majority, the vast majority of people who elected buy-up coverage chose to go in at the 90% level. Again, that's important, but it's probably going to be a little bit more important whether you signed up for $6 or you signed up for $7, because that's going to determine whether you got a payment on any percentage of your milk supply. As Mark pretty thoroughly discussed, we definitely are looking at a higher probability of payments, particularly in the first part of the year. I don't know if Mark said this quite so explicitly, but the indications that we're gleaning from trades on the CME is that the margin will improve in the second half of the year. I think my statement is consistent with what Mark said. I'm not quite that optimistic. And so it may be that we're in a period where we'll see payments of some magnitude for many farmers throughout much of 2015. And I think the timing of that and the magnitude of that does have implications for the next sign-up, which starts in July, will extend through September. And I think, of course, most folks will probably wait until the end of August or September before they make their choice. But their experience with the 2015 program will probably color to some extent their likelihood of signing up for 2016. And that will be something that educators and FSA will want to be watching. And it may result in some feeling that we need to do something a little bit differently with the program in future years. So we'll see how that plays out. I think in terms of if we do decide that there's some sort of tweaking or changing to MPP Dairy that would be helpful, I'm certain nothing would happen in the spring, and I think it would even be a little bit optimistic to think that something would happen in the fall. I think we've got to let this program play out a little bit before we really have a clear vision of whether or not any changes would be productive or what those changes would be. And that will probably be a conversation that couldn't even start before next fall, and probably the Congress is not going to be eager to jump in and fiddle around with agricultural policy right away, and Lord knows they've got plenty of other things to do. USDA has a little bit of latitude in how they implement this program. They can tweak the starting dates, they can tweak when you make your premium payments, a few things like that. But the big issues in the design of the program are defined by legislation that USDA has no ability to really modify in a significant way. So there could be a little policy agenda for MPP Dairy in 2015, but probably not significantly. However, we may see some agitation for changes if this program doesn't play out quite the way we had hoped it would. We'll see. This slide, I sometimes have said, kind of charts the career of Professor Andrew Novakovic. Each one of these colored boxes is a point in time when Congress did some sort of legislative activity to either tweak or extend or modify significantly existing dairy programs. I've got it mapped out against the all milk price just to give a sense of how these changes compared to periods of stress in the dairy industry. My point in sharing this is we've tried out a lot of different things, and I'm a little hard-pressed to think about what on earth we would come up with if we decide MPP Dairy didn't do everything for us that we wanted. I think our scenario for policy with respect to MPP Dairy is we might very well tweak it. We might even make changes that would be bigger than something we call a tweak. But I think this is basic framework is going to continue to be what we're talking about, if for no other reason that we've kind of exhausted our creativity in coming up with new approaches. Having said that, one thing that I also believe, and Mark would certainly have thoughts on this as well, is I think to the extent that we see variability in margins over the next 5 years, I believe they will be driven more by changes in the price of milk, volatility in the price of milk, than they will by volatility in the price of corn and soybeans and alfalfa hay. That certainly doesn't mean that I expect the price of corn to be constant over the next 4 years, but I think the tweaks in margin will be driven more by the price of milk, and that gets into the issue of things like cyclical milk prices and so on. Okay, let's stop talking about MPP Dairy and those sorts of things and say what else is on the table. I thought this page from the National Milk Producers Federation might be a good one-shot look at what a leading dairy producer lobbying organization thinks is on the agenda. If you look at their chart here, you can see that there's a wide range of topics: food safety, animal health, big energy, environmental issues, and so on. Some of the items on this list are pretty granular, pretty small scale. Somatic cell standards. Should we reduce the somatic cells allowed in grade A milk is the fundamental question there. Does this promote high quality? What are the trade-offs? And some of them are very broad. Sustainability, for goodness sakes, a huge issue. We undoubtedly have to carve some little bit out of that if we were going to have a conversation in Congress. But they're suggesting a wide range of topics and a wide range of issues. Economic policies do not dominate anything on this page. In fact, if you click on those items under economic policies, you'll find that these really aren't economic policies that they're talking about. It's basically price reporting information. So I think we are going to see the attention, the regulatory and policy-making attention, move away from these sort of safety net issues to other issues. That might be hard to do in a market that's defined by really low margins, but I think there's a feeling, as I said, we've probably done about as much as we can from a policy standpoint with that, and we just have to let that new program play out. And in the meantime, let's look at a few other things. My list isn't remarkably different from what you saw from National Milk, but let me give you a couple different spins. I do think we may see a little bit of follow-up on MPP Dairy. I've talked about that. We'll see. That might take a while. Farmer attitudes, I think, are going to be very much defined by, did it work for me? And different folks will have different ideas about what it means to did it work for me? One economic issue that is not on the National Milk Producers Federation list, although of course I know they're very much aware of it, is whether or not we're going to get into some larger federal milk marketing order discussions. And if we do, this would, I think, no doubt be precipitated if and when the dairy industry in California formally requests the United States Department of Agriculture to begin what's called a promulgation hearing. This would be the beginning of a process that could result in markets in California being regulated as a federal milk marketing order, replacing their current state system. This has been very much in the minds of California, and certainly no secret that people elsewhere in the U.S. There's been times when we thought, oh, it's not going to happen. Other times when we thought, oh my gosh, I think there might be something next month. There's the feeling currently is we're on the brink of a request, so we'll see. But I think my point here is if this particular Pandora's box is opened, we may find that other parts of the country are inspired to say, well, we need to have a conversation about our part of the country as well, and this may not end up being just confined to California. Immigration reform is obviously very much on the minds of folks. If you follow those events, particularly the political part, you know that President Obama recently issued an executive order that changes, not the law by any means, he has no power to change the law, but kind of changed how the U.S. government enforced that particular law with respect to a certain class of undocumented immigrants. This has created a big political rift. Bob may comment on that later, and I think that's going to make immigration reform all that much harder. And this, of course, is quite important to dairy. My last point on this slide is, you know, by the time we fix this particular barn door, all the cows may have escaped. It seems to me more and more agriculture is finding ways around the uncertainty of farm labor and, frankly, the increasing cost of farm labor. And robotics is the obvious example in dairy. We've seen similar advances in mechanical harvesting for tree fruits, for example. And so I sometimes wonder if we're going to fix this problem after the industry has that sort of figured out its own solution. But it will certainly be an agenda item. Animal welfare is a pretty gigantic issue. This slide shows sort of two different perspectives on animal welfare. Obviously the more friendly and perhaps defensive voice that's represented by the National Milk Producers Federation program. The other panel, the humane farm animal care, is hardly the most radical of folks in promoting new ideas about animal health care, but it gives you some sense of that other side. Clearly, animals that live in crates have been the focus of attention. Chickens, most famously here recently, especially with the California law. Gestation crates for sows, we've seen examples of that. You know, we may see more in terms of calf raising, but clearly the dairy industry needs to be prepared for increasing and higher profile criticisms of what we think of as pretty reasonable animal handling aspects on farms and defending those. I think we're going to see more and more our downstream customers, the grocery stores, the food service industries, and so on, looking for some kind of third-party assurance that their suppliers are providing products where the animals are raised under some standard of conditions that they can promote to customers. We've seen that most recently with Chipotle actually withdrawing certain meat products from their menu because of concerns about how a particular supplier was treating animals in a program that they have that's entirely their own program. So this won't be just limited to sort of a federal legislative agenda. I think there's also going to be a host of things that come under sort of a product labeling category. This slide kind of emphasizes geographic indicators, which are important in our conversations with the European Union and have implications even for the European agreement with Canada and how the U.S. relates to Canada in that regard. The U.S. has been kind of got its hand slapped by the WTO for its own country of origin labeling, something that many folks in U.S. agriculture think is pretty benign and only fair. And of course, there are other things that are more about healthfulness and safety, such as the concerns with GMO-free. These things are inherently troubling to us because even if you have science to back up your position, the customer often doesn't really care. And I think it will be increasingly vexing for us to figure out what can we do to either promote the things we think are promotable or defend the things that we think need defense. And to some degree, this will become a policy issue more so in 2015. The broad list of healthfulness, nutrition, I think will also be important. One of the reasons for this, and Bob may comment on this as well, is this is a year when the United States Congress needs to look at what's called reauthorization for a lot of the children and feeding programs that certainly are not about dairy, but are very definitely important to dairy. And these will, under the new Republican Congress, will get involved in a lot of other things besides is milk good for you, but it will include that. And it'll include things like should we have work requirements or other qualification rules for programs like the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program or food stamps, which could have implications for the availability of these programs for folks, and then consequently downstream implications for the demand for food products, including dairy, which of course is a very important part of the market basket for low-income families. So this is also something that we want to pay some attention to. I hinted at the trade agreement part of this conversation when I talked about the European geographic preferences. I think there's a lot of good reason to be supportive of these trade agreements, and certainly there's a lot of talk about one of the few things that a Republican Congress and President Obama might agree on is giving the president so-called fast-track authority, which makes it easier for the president to put together an agreement that the Senate can ratify. But even with that so-called fast-track agreement, these trade agreements that we're in the middle of, the Pacific one and the EU one that we're a little bit more in the beginning of, are still going to be pretty hard work for us to conclude. And they definitely have implications for dairy and certainly implications for agriculture. So this will be part of our conversation as well. So with that, I'll turn it back to the organizers. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. One volunteer answer I'll give. I've been spending a lot of time thinking about yogurt, and I'll just say we have had a boom in Greek yogurt, but we have not had a boom in the yogurt category more generally. So as Mark kind of implied, we're continuing to see upward trends in yogurt, and we may see kind of a tapering of the growth in Greek yogurt. But in point of fact, there wasn't a boom in the overall yogurt category, more switching inside that category, and that good trend is still going to be there, but it might not have be as dramatic as we thought it was. That's it, Bob. Thanks for letting me in again.
Andy, great presentation. A lot of great information there. We do have a number of questions in here. Mark did have to leave us, Andy, so I will focus these directly on you. But again, great presentation. The first one, what percentage of milk production do you estimate, is covered if you include both MPP and LGM dairy?
Well, I suspect it's probably between 40 and 50%. Keep in mind that although the sign-up for LGM dairy was pretty big relative to the track record of that program, you had 23,000 plus dairy farmers enroll in MPP dairy. You had 750 enroll in LGM dairy. So from that standpoint, it can't possibly be a gigantic percentage of the U.S. milk supply. I think we will probably find that the people who participated in LGM dairy paid a higher premium but got something back for it more likely than the folks that signed up maybe for a low premium value in MPP dairy but elected a coverage that won't return them any benefits at all. So part of it is the percentage of milk supply, but part of it is what coverage level did you choose.
The next question kind of along that line, but you had noted that you think there'd be quite a bit of difference between different states or different areas within a state in MPP sign-up. And the question was, do you think that's related to LGM participation in some areas?
Well, this is an hypothesis. I certainly can't say that I know this for fact, but I think what we'll see is that the really large-scale farms, I sometimes call them the jumbos, were more attracted to other risk management tools than they were to MPP Dairy, and LGM Dairy would certainly be one of those tools, not the only one. And so if we discover, for example, that the sign-up in Western New York, based on a percentage of farms, was a little lower than it was in Southeastern New York, it'd be pretty easy to say, gosh, I suspect that has something to do with the size of farm. And so it's not so much, I wouldn't say LGM Dairy caused the sign-up in MPP. I'd say the real root issue here is if you're a large-scale producer, you probably were looking at a broader array of tools than a smaller scale producer, and LGM Dairy happened to be one of them.
Okay. One more LGM question, and then we'll pivot to a different set of questions. But can you please explain the difference between the margin protection program and LGM Dairy?
Yeah, well, that sounds like a webinar for a couple of months from now. But both of them are similar in the sense that they target income over feed cost. So in that respect, they're in the same sort of category. Clearly, LGM Dairy allows farmers much more flexibility, particularly in how much feed and what proportion of feed they choose, the levels, the magnitudes that they cover, highly flexible. Tends to be much more expensive, but the expense comparison has to be qualified. When market levels, when market margins look pretty good, you can give yourself downside margin protection in LGM Dairy. Number one, that's actually fairly cheap, and number two is higher than anything you could do at the $8 level for MPP Dairy. When market margins tend to be low, MPP Dairy is much more likely to be a bargain compared to what you can get with LGM Dairy. And when market margins are low, you probably couldn't even come close to $8 coverage under LGM Dairy, whereas with MPP, that $8 coverage is always available. So there are definitely some advantages to LGM Dairy, and clearly some folks have decided they like those advantages. But it's not so easy to say this is always better about LGM and this is always better about MPP. It will vary a little bit depending on the nature of the year that you're in.
Very good. Next question. Do you think the large amount of milk dumped over the holidays was an indication that supply management should have been retained as part of the MPP program?
Well, you know, the attitude or the perspective on whether or not we should have had some sort of a supply management piece in this program hinges as much on personal values as it does on some sort of economic reality. But I would say we can't look at this recent event that was reported in the press over the holidays as having any particular bearing or result of MPP Dairy, because that program didn't exist. So what that tells us is we have day-to-day, week-to-week ebbs and flows in milk production relative to milk demand, regardless of what we do with dairy policy. And the fact of the matter is there are some cooperatives who long ago decided they wanted to protect against a milk surge by having manufacturing capacity that they know in some times of the year will sit empty. And there are other cooperatives who looked at the costs of those plants sitting underutilized and said, you know what, I would rather have to deal with a surplus of milk by finding a home for it somewhere else than to pay for the cost of having an unused plant locally. And so when a cooperative who chooses Plan B has a hard time finding that distant customer, it becomes something we talk about in the news. We don't have big news stories that say cooperative X dairy plant is only running at 10% capacity this year, oh my gosh. And this, I think, is just the nature of coordinating supply and demand in the industry, and I wouldn't say this has any implication for what we ought to do in a safety net program.
Thank you, Andy. Next question. How and when can we link the NASS price to the CME so that we can avoid the lag on the way up and the lag on the way down? They go on to say the lag price hurts cooperatives when prices drop, and the lag hurts farmers when prices rise.
Well, that's a tricky question, and perhaps I should offer a little bit of an explanation for folks who might not be quite sure what we're talking about here. Everyone who operates in the cheese industry and other manufactured products knows that the Chicago Mercantile Exchange spot market prices, the current prices, are used as a price signal on almost every contract for these manufactured products sold in the United States. If you know what happened on the CME, it's a pretty good prediction of what's going to happen on every product sold in the U.S. In the manufacturing sector. The U.S. Department of Agriculture does not use CME prices when it sets federal order minimums. What it does is it uses a survey of actual prices that processors receive when they sell these commodities. And USDA's position has been, we don't feel comfortable using some exchange price. We want to go out there, we want to see what the real selling price was. And what you find out is that the real selling price is never exactly the same number, but oh my goodness, it's really, really close, and it moves up and down in a very similar way. What the person who asked this question is saying is, yeah, it moves together in a similar way, but there's a little gap sometimes. There's a little distance between what we see happening on the CME and what shows up in this survey. And sometimes when you have these big price movements, that lag can be a little troubling. Frankly, my opinion is that USDA is going to probably take a pretty strong position that they are uncomfortable with establishing minimum milk prices based on a spot market in Chicago, and that we might be able to somehow improve the survey, but I don't see it very likely that we would actually eliminate the survey and just go with a CME-based pricing.
Thank you, Andy. We have 3 more questions, and then we will jump to our next segment. We're getting close to what the allotted time that we had told people. We will run into the next half an hour or so if folks want to stay on. Next question, Andy, is an interesting one going back when you think of dairy policy over a long time. But how significant has the change in size stratification of dairy producers, dairy operations in the Northeast been over the past 2 years? And what impact will that have on future approaches on dairy policy consensus within the industry?
Well, it's an excellent question, and I can only say I'll give you my opinion. I think there are 2 ways in which the changing structure of the industry, not just in the Northeast but everywhere, has implications for what we do in policy. One is, do dairy farmers need help from the government? The second question, or the second angle on this, is, do I feel like giving these guys help? A little bit different approach, different angle on this. And I think I think it's fair to say that very large-scale farms clearly have owners who are spending almost all their time on management. If they're providing labor to the farm, it's probably because they think it's fun, not because they actually have to. And they're employing other folks to do the work on the farm. And in fact, the really big guys, the guys I sometimes call jumbos, are actually hiring people to do management. They're hiring people to work on their risk management program, never mind managing the cows and the equipment and all those other important production aspects. And I think you could make a case that while these guys certainly are not immune to rising and falling prices and so on, they just simply have a greater ability to work through these issues on their own. And this gets to the question of, do they need help in the first place? Again, I'm certainly not going to suggest these large-scale farms are supermen and women, but one could make the case that the need for a government program is really different when you've got very large-scale farms as opposed to smaller farms that are less well able to deal with these market changes. The second part of that, though, is also public attitudes, willingness to help. And I think one of the things we're clearly seeing is the public sentiment for helping large-scale agriculture is a lot less than when they think, farmers are, working in their blue jeans with dirt under their fingernails, and oh my gosh, they don't make much money and so on. And every time you see a story that says average farm household income is 50% greater than household income for other Americans, you've just undermined any sense that agriculture needs assistance. So to me, that's the political consequences of this farm stratification, as it was mentioned.
Thank you. Interesting question, interesting answer there. Next one kind of puts us a little bit different perspective, but asking you whether the land-grant institutions are doing enough to explain that GMOs are safe.
Well, that's maybe as a fellow who lives in a land-grant institution, I shouldn't be the guy that answers that, but I'll answer it in two ways. One is, maybe not. Maybe you could always say we should do more, but the flip side of that coin is a lot of the scientific research that we point to in defense of these new technologies comes from researchers at universities. So whether we talk about it as much as we should is a little bit different than whether or not we're actually providing the important scientific information that you want to talk about. But the second part that I'll mention is, frankly, I do not believe that this concern, this issue of the acceptability of modern technologies is going to be effectively addressed by people wearing white lab coats. The people who are critical of these technologies are not people who are ignorant of the science. They aren't going to change their mind because you've explained the science to them in a way that they didn't previously understand. These are people who are thinking with a completely different part of their brain. And they're saying, I don't care what you say. I'm worried about the future health of my son or daughter, or I'm worried about how that poor animal is going to be treated or grow, or how long they will live and under what conditions, and so on and so forth. And I think we have to address a lot of these issues not with the rationality of science, but with a perspective more about what is it that's really bothering you, and can I give you a little more assurance that doesn't require you to understand microbiology any better. And that's a hard one. But I would caution folks that having more people in white lab coats telling a story probably isn't going to hit the mark.
Our last question, Andy, a little bit lighter than the last one, but our last question, and then if you want any final comments, I will leave that up to you. But we've seen growing trends in the alcoholic beverage market, hard cider, microbreweries, etc. Is there any opportunity for dairy producers to capitalize on this market in any way?
Well, that's an interesting question. I certainly didn't expect. And the first thing that comes to my mind is a beverage I had many years ago from Switzerland that made a fermented drink from whey products. So, to the extent that milk has got carbohydrates in it, we can turn it into alcohol, and who knows what we might be able to do. I think perhaps I don't know about alcohol, but I think the bigger question is, while we can be justifiably proud of the nutrition provided in a glass of milk and how it's valuable not only to little kids but even middle-aged women and so on, the consumers are looking for a lot more in their beverages than just nutrition. And what can we do with milk that scratches a variety of these itches? One of the things that I think actually is a pretty positive development is the fact that Coca-Cola is now selling milk products. I'm not going to say Coca-Cola is going to quickly become my favorite dairy company, but when you have a mass marketer like that that has a very different perspective on beverage consumption and sees dairy as a part of that, to me that's a good sign.
Andy, any final comments? That was a great overview, on policy issues facing the dairy industry. Any last comments as folks think about 2015?
Yeah, well, I'm very concerned about where markets are heading and also how people feel they have covered themselves either with MPP Dairy or something else. And I would encourage anyone who is a producer or works with producers to provide feedback. Boy, if you can do it to me or Mark directly, that'd be great. But provide feedback about what's working, what isn't working, what could we do better. I'm thinking about that a lot these days. And like I say, I think our challenge is to figure out how to make these programs, these tools we have, a success, because I don't think we got a whole lot of new tools that we're going to find somewhere else.
Again, thank you so much, Andy. It's always great to have you as part of a Farm Credit East webinar. Excellent perspective, and greatly appreciate your involvement.
Thanks very much.
Our next part is me. I'm not going to spend much time in introduction here, but I work with Farm Credit East and cover public affairs issues as well as a number of other responsibilities. It's my pleasure to have a chance to very quickly provide an overview on public affairs issues, government relations issues we're looking at in 2015. I will quickly talk about the makeup of Congress, some changes in the Ag committees, and some likely issues that we'll see in the Ag committees or possibly with the full Congress. My caution today, though, and it's a big caution, is it is very early in the process. We just elected a majority leader in the Senate, speaker in the House of Representatives last week. They are just now passing the first pieces of legislation. They're not, in all cases, committees have not been appointed. In fact, in most cases, committees have not been appointed by the House of Representatives. So, a little hard looking forward this year. So, with that, let's look at the playing field in Congress very quickly. I think you're all aware significant changes as a result of the November 2014 elections. The House Republicans picked up additional seats, so you see they have a fairly significant majority on the House side with 248. The midpoint is 218. So you need 218 votes, everybody voting, to pass legislation in the House. So the Republicans pick up some seats and are fairly strong going into this session. In the Senate, the Republicans picked up 8 seats, took the majority. So when you look at that, it's 54 Republicans, 46 Democrats and independents. You count the 2 independent members caucus with the Democrats on the Senate side. Essentially, the House Republicans, if they can agree upon themselves, they pretty much can pass whatever they decide is appropriate. They have strong control. And on the Senate side, it's a little bit more difficult. The filibuster rules or such will restrain what the Senate Republicans are able to do. Of course, the Democrats control with the president, control the executive branch. That means he has the power of the veto, which we are likely to see this year in a number of cases. but he's also viewed as a lame duck, and to some extent that reduces his ability, particularly to influence the Democrats that are in Congress. Let's just look at the Northeast real quick. We had no changes in the U.S. Senate. On the House side, the Republicans picked up 5 seats that had been previously held by Democrats. Bruce Poliquin up in Maine, Frank Genta in New Hampshire, Lee Sedlin, that's a Riverhead district down in the Long Island area, Elise Stefanik, northern New York, where Bill Owens had previously served, and John Katko in central New York, kind of Syracuse toward Rochester, doesn't include Rochester, but across the Wayne County. Look at the Northeast from an Ag Committee perspective. We have 2 members on the Senate Agriculture Committee, Senator Leahy and Senator Gillibrand. On the House, Chris Collins had served on the Ag Committee. He has moved to a higher level committee called the Energy and Commerce Committee, and I don't expect he's going to serve in agriculture. He may get a waiver and serve in agriculture, but I don't expect that's going to be the case. When you go to the Energy and Commerce Committee or the Appropriations Committee or the Ways and Means Committee, you usually are not allowed to serve on another committee. You can request a waiver to do that, but that often is not approved. Chris Gibson, which is kind of the Catskill area, running across Rensselaer County down through Schoharie County, etc., is on the Ag Committee. He has announced this will be his last term. He's not going to run in 2016. And Custer up in New Hampshire, western part of New Hampshire, Joe Courtney, eastern part of Connecticut, and Sean Patrick Maloney and Jim McGovern. The Democrats have not actually named their committee members. I expect those Democrats to continue, even though Congresswoman Custer has been mentioned for the Transportation Committee. At this point in time, simply do not know what changes there will be on the Democratic side. Looking at the Ag Committees, big changes, both the House and the Senate Agriculture Committees. At the chairman level, Pat Roberts takes over in the Senate. Senator Roberts is from Kansas. He is the first person to go from the House of Representatives, where he chaired the House Agriculture Committee in the late 90s, and now he chairs the Senate Agriculture Committee in the Senate. On the House side, the new chairman is Mike Conaway, Lubbock, Texas. I believe he's an accountant by trade or by his previous occupation. So he takes over there. Significant turnover of members. Again, all the appointments to the committees, including the Agriculture Committee, have not been made at this point. Their primary focus likely to be on Farm Bill oversight at various times. Subcommittees or the full committee will bring USDA and others in and testify on implementation of the Farm Bill, raising various issues. Nutrition and nutrition expenditures. Andy mentioned this in his presentation. That's really where a lot of focus, I think, particularly on the House Agriculture Committee, will be. You may recall big fight in the Farm Bill to cut the SNAP program. I believe $8 to $9 billion was taken out of SNAP over a 10-year period. But that issue may come up again, as well as school lunch reauthorization, child nutrition program reauthorizations. So I think nutrition program reauthorization and expenditures will be the single biggest part of the action in the Agriculture Committees, both the House and the Senate. And then there'll be oversight in other regulatory issues, but many of the regulatory issues that are of major concern to agriculture fall outside of the Agriculture Committees. And I'll touch on that at the very end of my presentation. I won't go into the Agricultural Act of 2014, passed about a year ago, signed last February. I think you know this information, generally speaking. About 80% or 78–80% of the Farm Bill expenditures are really in nutrition. And that's pretty much the SNAP program or the food stamp program. and then you drop quite a ways down to the $90 billion for crop insurance, or $58 billion for conservation, and $44 billion for commodity support programs. Of course, the Farm Bill implementation is underway with the MPP program sign-up already completed for the first year. The Agricultural Risk Coverage Program and the Price Loss Coverage Programs, those are for the program crops. Their sign-up, I believe, is March 31. We have an upcoming webinar on that here in February that will have some additional information out there for people interested. Andy noted that there could be changes to the dairy provision or other provisions considered. I agree with that. In the end, I don't think that we're likely to see changes in the Farm Bill. I think the concern is going to be opening up the process could lead to other changes, and we don't want to, the members that would like to see minor changes or tweaks, if you will, just simply will decide, and the chairs of the committee will decide that it was a tough sled to get through the last Farm Bill, so opening up it for technical changes and other relatively minor changes would be very difficult. Andy kind of covered farm labor immigration reform. I certainly agree with his comments. Clearly, the President took action in November, December on executive orders, executive actions, providing temporary relief, deferred deportment, if you will, in certain situations, could impact up to maybe 4 million people out of the 11, 12 million undocumented folks in the country. Expanded waivers in some cases, no provision specific to agriculture in it. I think it may be helpful to, the executive orders may be helpful in some situations, but I suspect there's also other concerns that the executive orders have, that it may help certain folks become more mobile and move from one job to a different job in the future. Strong opposition, congressional opposition from the Republicans to the executive orders. Some Democratic opposition, but for the most part, it's Republican opposition. Congress is looking, majority Republicans are looking for a way to force changes to the President's executive orders, executive actions. They're trying to do that through an appropriations bill to fund the Department of Homeland Security. Back in December, Congress passed a appropriations bill, a spending bill, if you will, that took every agency, all agencies, through till September 30, 2015, except for the Department of Homeland Security, which is funded through February. Trying to change the executive orders in the appropriations process or in any legislation is going to be difficult for a whole bunch of reasons. But one of the bottom lines is the President's likely to veto any major changes here, and that could bring us to brinks of political power here as Congress tries to do something, the President pushes back, and we will see what happens with DHS funding. But awful lot of concern with Homeland Security, with heightened concern over terrorism, and I think it's going to be very, very tough to get a real repeal of the EOs through legislation. So it's something to watch, but we'll have to see. We'll have to see how the current DHS situation plays out, really, to have any idea if there's anything new that can occur on farm labor. I would say overall, there's relatively little appetite by the rank-and-file Republicans for overall immigration reform. Maybe for pieces, but for overall immigration reform, similar to what Congress did in 2013, what the Senate did in 2013. I don't see that, at least on the House side. We may see interest in reviving some kind of agricultural guest worker provisions, some kind of improvements. May see an effort to try to modify the H-2A program to include dairy. Of course, the H-2A program currently is only for seasonal workers, temporary agricultural employment situations. So we may see that, but at this point in time, again, with the situation playing out currently, and the House just passed legislation on this yesterday as it relates to the President's executive orders and repealing those executive orders or pushing back against those executive orders. With that situation playing out, I just think it's too early to tell what might be possible here. Andy already mentioned trade agreements. It is one area that we may see some agreement between the White House and Congress on it. You have both a Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. That's a Pacific Rim. I think 12 countries going from New Zealand to Japan. The United States would be involved in that. That's being negotiated at the current time. You also have a Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership Agreement out there, not moving quite as fast as Pacific Partnership Agreement. Before negotiations are completed, it is likely Congress is going to have to pass what's called Trade Promotion Authority. In order really to negotiate agreement, a country has to be able to tell those it's negotiating with that I can put this before Congress and it's not going to get changed. And that's really what TPA does, Trade Promotion Authority. It says that if an agreement is reached within certain parameters that Congress established, then it will go to the floor for up or down votes. So that's the concept there. So that is something that we may very well see in the next couple of months as the negotiations on trade agreements move ahead. You know, trade agreements, the devil's in the details. There may be some opportunities here. I think most major farm organizations believe there's some significant opportunities here to reduce trade barriers, move out more U.S. agricultural products. But I think at this point in time, and I think that's good news, hopeful news, but we'll have to see what the details provide for. Let me pivot into federal tax provisions. A number of you on the webinar today probably were watching this back in December, where Congress passed some tax extender legislation, which included Section 179, included bonus depreciation, certain incentives for biofuels production. And they did that. They passed that in December, signed very late, probably December 22nd or so, by the President, and they did it for 2014. So they only did it for last year. They didn't extend them into 2015. So we go into 15 with, once again, tax provisions unclear, uncertain in the year. Paul Ryan, who has been the chairman of the Budget Committee, now takes over as chairman of the Ways and Means Committee. I think there's going to be talk. There is talk about comprehensive tax reform. Personally, I think that's very difficult. Will be very difficult to get done, but there may be an opportunity for a very limited tax reform piece at some point in time. I do think that we'll see tax extender legislation move faster than we saw last year with the House and the Senate, with the Republicans. There was political issues last year between the House and Senate and within the Senate. I think the challenge there might be with the President. I think the President could raise certain issues and want certain things in order to get the tax extenders done. At that point in time, I don't think the plan really has been determined as to how Congress is going to move ahead on tax extenders. Just a final slide on some other issues that I know is of interest to some folks. Certainly the waters of the U.S., the WOTUS proposal. That is an EPA, Army Corps of Engineers proposal. It's a regulatory proposal to expand the definition of waters under the Clean Water Act. Regulatory definition in this case, it's to expand the reach of the Clean Water Act, if you will, would include more wet areas. I mean, I'm a little hesitant to call them wetlands because I think they're wet for a little part of the time. That might be included there. Certainly more tributaries included. That is still in the regulatory phase. In other words, There's been no final rule promulgated. If you see a final rule promulgated there, I do think there's a chance that Congress will step in and try to kill implementation of that through the appropriations process. GMO labeling, Andy mentioned, there was a good question asked on that. You have bills introduced on both sides of that equation. You certainly have bills introduced in Congress, or will be introduced in Congress, to require certain GMO labeling. And you also have a bill supported by many in the agriculture food industry, the Safe and Accurate Food Labeling Act, that requires FDA review of products and a disclosure only if there's a material difference between food produced. So, you have a couple different competing proposals out there. I think while the legislation that passed in Vermont is in litigation, is in the courts, I just don't think Congress is going to act on this. I might be wrong, but my guess at this point in time is Congress will, in the end, will decide to hold off on any specific actions as it relates to GMO labeling or genetic engineering. Food Safety Modernization Act doesn't impact dairy as much as does produce producers. Final regulations later this spring. Congress could certainly do oversight hearings there. But again, that issue, as well as the WOTUS issue, are really not issues in the Agriculture Committee. The Ag Committee might find ways of holding hearings relating to those issues, but are not likely to institute or initiate legislation in those areas. And finally, Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act. You're seeing action now as it relates to the work week issue, going from 30 hours to 40 hours on the eligibility side of that issue. Again, the president's likely to veto legislation unless there's some kind of angle that Congress can take in negotiating with the president on certain specific issues. So unlikely, I think, to see major change there, maybe some tweaks, but again, with the president having veto authority, or I don't think you're likely to see major changes there. That's the end of my presentation. If there were a question, yeah, I do have one question that came in, and it says, Andy said TPP the trade agreements would be good for us. What about the impact in New Zealand on our dairy markets? I think it's an excellent question. And as I said in my presentation, I think the devil's in the details. I think we have to see what provisions are included. The reality is that the size of the U.S. dairy industry is so much bigger than New Zealand that I suspect that importing a lot into the U.S. would not be likely. But I think we have to see what the provisions are and then see what the specific impact is. Any other questions out there? I don't see any further questions. I think I will close it off. We are way over time, half an hour over time. I think we probably learned not to try to cut back a Dairy Outlook webinar. I do apologize for the opening where we were unable to get Andy Novakovic on before Mark, but I think we covered a lot of topics today. Hope this was very informative. On your screen, you're seeing our next webinar is on Cash Field Crops Outlook, February 9th, 11 a.m. We'll look at the support programs as part of that, the ARC and the PLC program. Again, producers will have, I believe, until March 31 to sign up. So we encourage participation on that webinar. We thank everybody. Again, a recording of this webinar can be found on farmcrediteast.com, webinars, /webinars, and we encourage you to utilize that as well as past webinars for information. If you have any comments or questions or suggestions for future webinars, please be in touch with Chris Lawton. You see his email address here. Chris is our Director of Knowledge Exchange, and we're always looking for areas that we could be helpful to provide information. So with that, I would like to thank everybody. Have a great day. Until next time. Thank you. Bye.